a shining guest of time. For him, mind's limiting firmament ceased above. The landmarks of the little person fell. The island eagle joined its continent. Overpast was this world of rigid, limiting form. Life's barriers opened into the unknown.
So we'll continue reading in Canto 3 of Book 1 on page 26. We're reading about King Aswapati's spiritual realization. Canto, his human self, like a translucent cloak, covered the all-wise, who leads the unseeing world, affiliated to cosmic space and time, and paying here God's debt to earth and man. A greater sonship was his divine right. Although consenting to mortal ignorance, his knowledge shared the light ineffable. A strength of the original permanence, entangled in the moment and its flow. He kept the vision of the vast behind. A power was in him from the unknowable. So we see that he is not someone like us who is striving and evolving slowly towards the divine, but that he represents a descent of the divine in humanity in order to lead humanity to its higher spiritual realization. And then we had just begun the new section on page 26 when we left off. And I'll just read the first lines of that section, which is where we left off, and then we'll continue from there. So as he grew into his larger self, humanity framed his movements less and less. A greater being saw a greater world. a fearless will for knowledge dared to erase the lines of safety reason draws that bar mind soar, souls dive into the infinite. Even his first steps broke our small earth bounds and loitered in a vaster, freer air. So we can continue from there. Um, I'll leave it to you to go around the room and select a reader. So maybe VJ will be doing that, or Suresh. So can the first reader begin? So B, you can read. Okay, that's no sound is coming. Okay. Yes. Yes. Now it's okay. Yes. It's okay. Thank you. Let's pause there. Can we pause? Thank you.
Oh, I thought you said something. I thought you said something. Well, can't walk around. Larry's in the kitchen working. It's just like, but you can walk in the living room, you can walk across the living room. Yeah, she wants to. What? Huh? Okay, well. Warm? No, you're not, it's not warm to be, don't feel warm. Don't feel warm.
This first sentence that B has read seems to refer back to uh, the Vedic legend of the Angarasi rishis who rescue the cows from the cave of the Panis. And I thought I would read just this is one of the important legends in the Vedas that is referred to many times in different ways. There are different variations on it, different deities that are involved. But there is this general theme of rescuing the cows, which represent spiritual light, from a cave, which are hidden there by some demons. And I'll read a little bit from The Secret of the Veda. There is a chapter devoted to this legend. And I'll read from there. And I've kind of abbreviated it a little bit. So the aspiration of the Vedic seer was the enrichment and expansion of man's being, the birth and the formation of the Godheads in his life sacrifice, the increase of the force, truth, light, joy, of which they are the powers, until through the enlarged and ever-opening worlds of his being, the soul of man rises, sees the divine doors, Devir Dvaira, swing open to his call, and enters into the supreme felicity of a divine existence beyond heaven and earth. This ascent is the paradise of the Angaras rishis. All the gods are conquerors and givers of the cow, the horse, and the divine riches. But it is especially the great deity Indra who is the hero and fighter in this warfare, and who wins for man the light and the force. But ordinarily, the rishis image the acquisition of this wealth as a conquest effected against certain powers, the dasyus, sometimes represented as possessing the coveted riches which have to be ravished from them by violence, sometimes as stealing them from the Aryan, who has then to discover and recover the lost wealth by the aid of the gods. The dasyus, who withhold or steal the cows, are called the panis, a word which seems originally to have meant doers, dealers, or traffickers, but this significance is sometimes colored by its further sense of misers. Their chief is Vala, a demon whose name signifies probably the circumscriber or encloser. Vala dwells in a lair, a hole in the mountains. Indra and the Angaras rishis have to pursue him there and force him to give up his wealth. For he is Vala of the cows, Valam Gomantam. The Panis also are represented as concealing the stolen herds in a cave of the mountain, which is called their concealing prison, Vavra, or the pen of the cows, Vraja, or sometimes in a significant phrase, Gavyam Yurvam, literally the cowy wideness, or in the other sense of goal, the luminous wideness. this vast wealth of the shining herds. To recover this lost wealth, the sacrifice has to be performed. The Angarasis, or else Brihaspati and the Angarasis, have to chant the true word, the mantra. Sarama, the heavenly hound, has to find out the cows in the cave of the Panas. Indra, strong with the Soma wine, and the Angarasis, the seers, his companions, have to follow the track, enter the cave, or violently break open the strong places of the hill, defeat the Panas, and drive upward the delivered herds. So that gives a pretty good picture of this legend of the Angarasi rishis and the rescue of the cows from the cave. And this is also referred to at least a couple of times in Savitri. And this place, it's just very slightly alluded to in this sentence, this first sentence that B read. And this particular legend and myth seems to be combined with a different myth that may not be Vedic in origin, but there are some allusions to this giant's bow in the Mahabharata, in some other legends. I mean, it's also there in Greek myths, in which there is this kind of giant bow that the common man cannot either string or use, but only kind of the hero is able to use this bow. So here we see that Aswapati is able to lift up this bow and use it, pick it up lightly, like a giant's bow, left slumbering in a sealed and secret cave. So it juxtaposes these two different myths. But we see also explicitly related the significance of this, because it's revealing the powers that sleep unused in man within. So the cave is often representative of this kind of subconscious or hidden parts of our being. And within those hidden parts of our being are these great powers, which typically lie there unused, unknown by human beings. So it's an interesting sentence in its significance, but also in its relation to earlier literature and myths. And then Sri Aurobindo kind of continues describing Asupati's his great powers and abilities, his yogic powers. He made of miracle a normal act and turned to a common part of divine works, magnificently natural at this height, efforts that would shatter the strength of mortal hearts, pursued in a royalty of mighty ease, aims too sublime for nature's daily will. The gifts of the spirit crowding came to him. So we see all these great yogic powers opening up within Aswapati, him able to receive them. And then it describes some of these powers, this pure perception, which enveloped all nature in a single glance. And it was able to look into the very self of things and see the soul within beings and things. So he's able to look beyond the surface appearances and see the soul within and know within other people their motives, was able to understand what was the thoughts in their mind, the wish in their hearts. So all these things, he could look deep within a person and understand all that was hidden within, maybe hidden even from the person himself. Okay, can we continue then to the next passage? So who will read next?
I don't know where to start anymore. I lost it. Which line?
Okay, the second line on 27.
He felt the beating life in other men invade him with their happiness and their grief, their love, their anger, their unspoken hopes entered in currents or in pouring waves into the immobile ocean of his calm. He heard the inspired sound of his own thoughts re-echoed in the walls of other minds. The world's thought streams traveled into his ken. His inner self grew near to other selves and bore a kinship's weight, a common tie, yet stood untouched, king of itself alone. A magical accord quickened and attuned to ethereal symphonies the old earthy strings. It raised the servitors of mind and life to be happy partners in the soul's response. Tissue and nerve were turned to sensitive chords, records of luster and ecstasy. It made the body's means the spirit's acolytes.
Okay, thank you. Can we pause there? In this section, we see elaborated something of that first line of the section, as so he grew into his larger self. So here we see something of that larger self and what it consists of. And we see that he has a kind of a unity with the beings around him, with the world at large. So he feels his very intimately, almost as his larger self, other people and their thoughts, their feelings. He felt the beating life in other men invade him with their happiness and their grief, their love, their anger, their unspoken hopes, entered in currents or in pouring waves into the immobile ocean of his calm. So he hears the thoughts. His inner self grew near to others' selves and bore a kinship's weight, a common tie, yet stood untouched, king of itself alone. I think that's very important, that there are these two aspects where he feels all this surrounding movement of thought and feeling and motive, emotion, all these things, but yet he is not overborne by them. There's something within him which is able to stand apart, and also he has a basis of, I don't know, silence or something that is not moved by all of those movements of nature. He stood untouched, king of itself alone. Nevertheless, he participates in that, in those feelings, in those movements of nature, and bears a kinship's weight, a common tie. Oh, here was the other line that I was kind of looking for. They entered into currents or in pouring waves into the immobile ocean of his calm. So he has that basis of silence and calm into which all of these movements of nature flow. And then there is also a refinement of his own nature. So we see an attunement of his nature, a magical accord quickened and attuned to ethereal symphonies, the old earthy strings. It raised the servitors of mind and life to be happy partners in the soul's response. So his members of mind and life become partners of his soul. They become centered round his psychic being. And even the body, tissue and nerve were turned to sensitive chords, records of luster and ecstasy. It made the body's means the spirit's acolytes. So all his nature is also being refined and raised to a higher level. Let's continue.
Apparent sleep, the mystic tract beyond our waking thoughts, a door parted, built in by matter's force, releasing things unseized by earthly sense, a world unseen, unknown by outward mind, appeared in the silent spaces of the soul. He sat in secret chambers, looking out into the luminous countries of the unborn, where all things dreamed by the mind are seen and true, and all that the life longs for is drawn close. He saw the perfect in their starry homes, weary the glory of a deathless form, laying in the arms of the eternal's peace, wrapped in the heartbeats of God's ecstasy. He lived in the mystic space.
Let's pause there, please. I'll just note that if anyone wants to ask a question or make a comment, you can do so still, but you just have to raise your hand and so that the microphone can come to you. But I'll just comment on this passage here. One of the things that seems to be emphasized is that Asopati's experience of his soul we could say his psychic realization. It gives him a freedom from the heaviness of the physical consciousness. So in a sense, that psychic being is being released from the heaviness, the tamas, the inertia of the physical being. So it's able to, I guess, operate with this kind of finer mode, a more heavenly function. Its experience of its deeper sheaths, no more slept drugged by matter's dominance. And then he describes that again in the dead wall closing us from wider self into a secrecy of apparent sleep. So there is this dead wall, and that's kind of that heaviness of the physical nature that cuts us off from these wider experiences of the soul, which feels its oneness with all around, with other beings and with the world around us. That inner being has a much more intimate relation with the world around. And then there's another interesting thing that happens in Aswapati with this lessening of the outer physical consciousness, this refinement or opening into the inner being. He also is opening upwards to higher realms of the being. Well, a door parted, built in by matter's force, releasing things unseized by earthly sense. A world unseen, unknown by outward mind, appeared in the silent spaces of the soul. So, well, this doesn't point especially towards the higher realms, but again, it's emphasizing this opening into the inner being, no more shut out from that inner consciousness, from the force of matter and the physical being. But in what follows, it suggests kind of those higher spiritual realms above mind. He sat in secret chambers looking out into the luminous countries of the unborn, where all things dreamed by the mind are seen and true, and all that the life longs for is drawn close. He saw the perfect in their starry homes, wearing the glory of a deathless form, laying in the arms of the Eternal's peace, wrapped in the heartbeats of God ecstasy. What means what? Oh, it means starry is the stars, referring to the stars. So it's kind of, I think, a term alluding to heavenly or divine homes. So starry is kind of an adjective referring to stars. but the stars are kind of representing that heavenly realm.
And what is the tract?
What is
The
the, say
mystic, the
again?
mystic tract beyond our waking thoughts.
Yeah. So a tract is, I don't know, it's, I don't know how to describe it. It's a kind of a province or a section, a place. So it's a mystic tract. It's a kind of, it's in the occult realm, we could say, beyond our waking thoughts, in the occult realms. So that could be just in the inner being, or it could be above in the higher spiritual realms of existence. Yeah, we say mystic, it kind of suggests occult. So in the occult places or provinces. So and then we have this silent spaces of the soul. So he's centered in these silent spaces of the soul. It's silence, it's peace, it's calm, and he's looking out into, the wider realms of existence. He sat in secret chambers looking out into the luminous countries of the unborn, where all things dreamed by the mind are seen and true, and all that the life longs for is drawn close. So he's looking into these inner worlds, inner realms of our being, and where they represent kind of ideals also. There are things there that our outer nature can only dream of. There they are real. And that's why he can also see the perfect in their starry homes, wearing the glory of a deathless form. So in those realms, there are these more ideal places of existence where things are perfect, where there is eternal peace and God ecstasy. So can we continue?
Where am I reading?
Third line down on 28. Third line down on 28, page 28.
He lived in the mystic space where thought is born and will is nursed by an ethereal power and fed on the white milk of the eternal's strengths till it grows into the likeness of a god. In the witness is occult rooms with mind built walls on hidden interiors, lurking passages, opened the windows of the inner sight. He owned the house of undivided time, lifting the heavy curtain of the flesh. He stood upon a threshold, serpent watched, and peered into the gleaming, endless corridors, silent and listening in the silent heart for the coming of the new and the unknown. He gazed across the empty stillness and heard the footsteps of the undreamed idea. In the far avenues of the beyond, he heard the secret voice, the word that knows, and saw the secret face that is our own. The inner planes uncovered their crystal doors. Strange powers and influences touched his life. A vision came of
Thank you.
higher.
Let's pause there, please. Thank you. We see here a further elaboration of the same ideas that we just read in the last section. We see again this mystic space in which he lives. Earlier we had read the mystic tract beyond our waking thoughts. So, and here he speaks of a mystic space where thought is born. Where that is exactly, I don't know, but perhaps deep in the inner mind. And then will is nursed by an ethereal power. So we see that, again, there's kind of this divine source, it seems, of thought and will. He is able to access those realms. And then he speaks of the witnesses, occult rooms with mind-built walls. So he's in some realm of mind, apparently, but a kind of a witness consciousness, looking out into the, I guess, different mental constructions, ideas, conceptions, but standing back from them, kind of witnessing them, not closed up in those conceptions. And then we have these, again, he's entering into the inner being here, and this is emphasized here on hidden interiors, lurking passages, open the windows of the inner sight. So that inner part of our being, the inner mind, the inner vital, the inner physical consciousness, are much more connected to outside things. Whereas in our physical consciousness in which we usually live, there's kind of a sharp distinction between us and others, between our thoughts and their thoughts. But in the inner part of the being, that separation is not there, or certainly not as strong. So he's in that realm. And then there's this powerful line, he owned the house of undivided time. Normally, this realization of undivided time in which one can see the past, present, and future in a single glance is associated with quite a high state of the spiritual consciousness. I think it's especially associated with overmind consciousness. But he is the idea that he owned the house suggests he's kind of a master of that, of being able to see into the past and the future. And then again, we see how this outer consciousness shields us from all of these deeper experiences, lifting the heavy curtain of the flesh. That's again that heavy physical consciousness which keeps us cut off from our connection with the divine and with the cosmic consciousness around us. So he lifts that curtain and then stood upon the threshold, serpent watched, and peered into gleaming endless corridors, silent and listening in the silent heart for the coming of the new and the unknown. Very powerful lines suggesting something of the possibilities or of that silent consciousness, which can listen for the thoughts and for the coming of the future. Those possibilities that are already there, existent. We saw that he owned the house of undivided time. He could see into the future. So here he's like looking into the future, waiting for the coming of the new and the unknown, coming from the future. He gazed across the empty stillnesses, again, that in that silent consciousness, that witness consciousness, and heard the footsteps of the undreamed idea in the far avenues of the beyond. Instead of being hurried away by this thought or that thought, he's able to very quietly, patiently look, observe in that silence for the coming forms of the future, what will be coming. He heard the secret voice, the word that knows. Suggests a kind of knowledge coming perhaps through inspiration. And saw the secret face that is our own. Perhaps something of revelation there. And again, the inner planes, uncovered, their crystal doors. Strange powers and influences touched his life. As he opens into these inner planes, their greater powers associated with them are coming into his ken, into his power. Let's continue.
Vision came of higher realms than ours, a consciousness of brighter fields and skies, of beings less circumscribed than brief-lived men, and subtle bodies than these passing frames, objects too fine for our material grasp, acts vibrant with a superhuman light, and movements pushed by a superconscient force, and joys that never flowed through mortal limbs, and lovelier scenes than earth and happier lives. A consciousness of beauty and of bliss, a knowledge which became what it perceived, replaced the separated sense and heart, and drew all nature into its embrace. The mind leaned out to meet the hidden worlds. Air glowed and teemed with marvelous shapes and hues. In the nostril quivered celestial fragrances. On the tongue lingered the honey of paradise. A channel of universal harmony. Hearing was a stream of magic audience, a bed for occult sounds earth cannot hear.
Thank you. Can we pause there? Our inner being is connected with the other planes of existence, whereas we tend to be cut off due to the heaviness of the physical consciousness from these other planes of existence. If we can enter deep within into the inner plane of existence, into our psychic being, be centered there, then we can see the beings of these other planes of existence. There are other worlds full of beings on all different levels, planes of consciousness. So there are let's say, mental worlds. And even not just at one level, higher ones and lower ones. Kind of some higher realms of mind touching into the spiritual realms, others lower down, passing largely influenced by vital realms. And then there's even kind of realms of the mind that are dominated by physicality in some sense, so very practical kind of mind. And similarly, the vital has different subplanes, we could say. And then associated with the physical consciousness is a subtle physical consciousness, which is much more ethereal, much more refined than the outer physical. Whereas the outer physical is very dense and heavy, the subtle physical is not. It can be quite light and expressive of other things. Whatever it is expressing, it can express it very well, very close to that vibration. So he's able to experience these other realms. That's what's described in the beginning here. A vision came of higher realms than ours, a consciousness of brighter fields and skies, of beings less circumscribed than brief-lived men, and subtler bodies than these passing frames, objects too fine for our material grasp, acts vibrant with a superhuman light, and movements pushed by a superconscient force. Well, here also there's a suggestion of higher realms, beyond mind, more spiritual realms, pushed by a superconscient force, by divine forces, and joys that never flowed through mortal limbs. There are delights that the physical consciousness cannot express or cannot experience, but in these more subtle realms of existence, we can feel these kind of more refined senses of delight and beauty. Joys that never flowed through mortal limbs, and lovelier scenes than earth, and happier lives, and consciousness of beauty and of bliss. A knowledge which became what it perceived, whereas our knowledge tends to be divided, conceptual in nature, abstract, a representation of reality. There, that knowledge becomes what it perceives. It feels its identity with what it perceives. That replaced the separated sense and heart and drew all nature into its embrace. Feels its oneness with all around. And then we have the subtle senses described. We have our senses of taste and smell and hearing and vision. But there are also subtle senses corresponding to those, which are freer in the inner being. They're much freer and more sensitive and powerful than our physical senses. So we see air glowed and teemed with marvelous shapes and hues. In the nostrils quivered celestial fragrances. On the tongue lingered the honey of paradise. A channel of universal harmony. Hearing was a stream of magic audience. A bed for occult sounds earth cannot hear. So we see his subtle senses, those corresponding to our physical senses, are given much greater range and power and sensitivity. Can we continue?
Out of a covered tract of slumber self, the voice came of a truth submerged unknown that flows beneath the cosmic surfaces. Only mid an omniscient silence heard, held by intuitive heart and secret sense. It caught the burden of secrecies, scaled and dumb. It voiced the unfulfilled demand of earth and the song of promise of unrealized heavens, and all that hides in an omnipotent sleep in the
Unceasing.
unceasing drama carried by time on its long listening flood that bears the world's immobile doubt on a pilgrimage without goal. A laughter of sleepless pleasure foamed and spurned, and murmurings of desire that cannot die. A cry came of the world's delight to be, the grandeur and greatness of its will to live. Recall of the soul's adventure into space, a traveler through the magic centuries, a being's labor in matter's universe, its search for the mystic meaning of its birth, and joy of high spiritual response, its throb of satisfaction and content in all the sweetness of the gifts of life, in large breath and pulse and thrill of hope and fear, its taste of pangs and tears and ecstasy, its rapture's poignant beat of sudden bliss, the both of its passion and unending pain, the murmur and whisper.
Thank you. Let's pause there, please. Thank you. This passage is very interesting and powerful at the same time. It consists of just 3 sentences. The first is 5 lines, the second is 4, and the third is a long 18-line sentence. The first 2 shorter sentences kind of give an overview of the ideas that are then elaborated in the longer sentence. So the first says, well, we had just been reading about the subtle hearing. Hearing was a stream of magic audience, a bed for occult sounds earth cannot hear. So his subtle senses of hearing are very powerful, and he's able to detect the sounds of something that underlies the world's existence. So out of a covert tract, covert is hidden deep within, of slumber self, kind of the self in the, let's say, in the sleep, what would normally be for us like a sleep. The voice came of a truth submerged, unknown, that flows beneath the cosmic surfaces. So he hears the sound of a truth that flows beneath the surfaces of existence. And that truth is only heard mid an omniscient silence. So in that very still consciousness of knowing, the witness consciousness, he hears the sound or a voice held by intuitive heart and secret sense. So it's a kind of a knowledge, intuitive knowledge and sense that comes to him. And what is the nature of that? It caught the burden of secrecy, sealed and dumb. It voiced the unfulfilled demand of earth. What earth is seeking, and the song of promise of unrealized heavens, and all that hides in an omnipotent sleep. Again, it refers back in a sense to that triple time vision of the past and the present and the future, which he can see in a single glance. But he's seeing where the movement of the earth is moving towards its goal, as well as its past from where it's coming. So, and then in the longer sentence, we have these ideas elaborated more. In the unceasing drama carried by time. And that gives us, kind of a sense also of a correspondence between the content of the sentence and its form. Its form being a very long sentence, 18 lines long, because it's representing this unceasing drama carried by time. And he's going to describe it on its long listening flood that bears the world's insoluble doubt on a pilgrimage without goal. That's how it seems to us living in the outer consciousness. We don't know the goal of life, where things are moving, where it's all leading to. We're just kind of carried along in the stream, in the moment. And we have doubts about why is this meaningful? We're just going to end up, dying at the end of this life, and it's going to end. What is the significance of all of this? This insoluble doubt, and we have no way of really knowing. We just are on this pilgrimage without goal. We don't know. We're just moving along, carried along. A laughter of sleepless pleasure foamed and spumed. Spumed is like a foam or a froth. And murmurings of desire that cannot die. So there's this kind of pleasure in the life that just keeps flowing and moving, and desire that just continues and can never die, never is fully satisfied. But then of this kind of a deeper need he feels, this cry came of the world's delight to be. There is something that keeps this movement of life going, and it's this desire for delight, enjoyment of delight. The delight of existence, the grandeur and greatness of its will to live. Recall of the soul's adventure into space. A traveler through the magic centuries, and being's labor in matter's universe. This movement of life and mind have been continuing through the centuries, not knowing where it's headed towards, enjoying the delight of existence, suffering, its pain, its tragedy. But still, there's some will to live. We take some enjoyment in it, nevertheless, whatever it is. And that's what I think this recall of the soul's adventure into space. The soul descended into this movement. The soul was living happily in the divine infinite existence, but it had entered into this world of life and movement and form for that adventure, for the enjoyment of that adventure. In being's labor in matter's universe. It's also difficult, and it's a big work. It's search for the mystic meaning of its birth. It's search for why it has come. What is the goal? What is the significance of all this? And the joy of high spiritual response, which we sometimes may have, its throb of satisfaction and content, in all the sweetness of the gifts of life, its large breath and pulse and thrill of hope and fear, its taste of pangs and tears and ecstasy, its rapture's poignant beat of sudden bliss, the sob of its passion and unending pain. It's that long movement of life through the centuries, through life after life we've been experiencing, searching for the meaning of our existence, working in this laboratory of matter to refine it, to develop it, to unite it with the divine. But he's feeling that significance of the life, of existence. I think that unless there's a question, we would maybe pause there for today. If Suresh can give us some music to close, that would be nice.
Lifting the heavy curtain of the flesh. He stood upon the threshold, serpent watched, and peered into the gleaming endless corridor, silent and listening in the silent heart for the coming of the new and the unknown. He gazed across the empty stillness and heard the footsteps of the undreamed idea in the far avenue of the beyond.
Okay, thanks to Sri Aurobindo. Thank you for joining. We'll see you next week.